The Aegean twilight shimmered like molten copper as the ferry approached the remote Greek island of Kalinos. Tourists spoke in hushed excitement, unaware that death had already arrived before them. On the cliffside villa, known as the Oracle's Rest, a man lay sprawled upon ancient marble steps, his face frozen in terror, a crimson stain trickling toward the sea. When the telegraph announcing the tragedy reached Athens, one name was whispered urgently: Hercule Poirot. Now he stood on the deck, moustaches lifted slightly by the sea breeze, eyes narrowing, for murder, it seemed, had chosen a stage both beautiful and treacherous. Chapter 1. Arrival at the Oracle's Rest. The Aegean Sea shimmered beneath a dying sun, turning from molten gold to streaks of copper that glimmered like hammered metal. The ferry cut through the quiet waters with a steady, rhythmic pulse, its engine humming like a distant hymn. A soft breeze drifted across the deck, carrying with it the scent of salt, wild thyme, and something older, something ancient, as though the island itself exhaled secrets that had slept for centuries. Hercule Poirot stood alone near the railing, his gloved hands resting lightly on polished wood. His immaculate suit, tailored to geometric perfection, resisted the sea breeze with stoic dignity. But his moustaches, that proud, impeccable crest, trembled ever so slightly, as though reacting to a whisper only they could hear. Kalinos, an island known to few, spoken of quietly even among its neighbours. Remote, cradled by jagged cliffs and rocky shores, it was a place of legend. Its mysteries were older than memory, its tragedies older still. No advertisements brought tourists here, no guidebooks mentioned its name. And yet tonight, it awaited him. Poirot's eyes narrowed as the silhouette of the island came into view. A dark, brooding mass rising from the water like the back of a slumbering creature. The sky behind it deepened into lavender and indigo, while the last rays of the sun painted the horizon in thin streaks of dying fire. But atop the highest cliff stood a solitary structure, white, solemn, gleaming faintly. The villa, the Oracle's Rest. Not a name Poirot found reassuring. A few passengers clustered near him, whispering in a language he could not entirely follow, but whose tone conveyed both dread and fascination. He caught phrases here and there: Kalinuta, Meteora, Thanatos, death. Always there was death. He turned slightly as a deckhand approached, a stout man with weathered skin and a cap pulled low. "Senor Poirot," the man said in accented English, though Poirot detected the lilt of Greek beneath it. "We will dock in 10 minutes. The local officer is waiting for you." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, mon ami. And tell me, has the island seen many tragedies such as this?" The man hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the looming villa. His fingers tightened around the lantern he held. "No murder in 20 years, he said carefully. "But accidents, falls, people disappearing into the caves." He shrugged, though the gesture was uneasy. "The island is old. Things happen." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You imply the island itself conspires." The man's expression stiffened. "Not the island, sir. The Oracle." Before Poirot could ask more, the deckhand moved off quickly, as though afraid his own words might stir something listening beneath the waves. Poirot returned his gaze to the villa. A shiver, not of cold but of anticipation, ran through him. Crime, it seemed, had chosen a dramatic stage. But murder, he knew, was rarely a thing of superstition. Humans committed crime, not stones, not sea, not ancient whispers. Yet sometimes superstition wrapped itself around guilt like ivy on marble. The ferry groaned to a halt. Lanterns swung from posts along the small dock, their lights flickering as if frightened of the wind. The passengers disembarked rapidly, eager to put distance between themselves and the approaching night. But Poirot walked with measured steps, descending the gangplank with the dignity of a man arriving not at a crime scene, but at an opera he had seen before, yet still found intellectually stimulating. Waiting for him stood a thin man in a brown uniform, moustache drooping, cap askew. He looked as though nerves had chewed him from the inside out. "Inspector Nicholas Papadakis," the man announced, offering a trembling hand. "You must be Hercule Poirot." "I am he, yes," Poirot replied warmly, shaking the hand. "And you, monsieur, appear troubled." "I have reason," Papadakis muttered. "Kalinos is not a place accustomed to, how do you say, violent endings." Poirot's expression softened. "Death is never polite, Inspector. It arrives as it chooses." Papadakis grimaced at that. "I wish you would not say such things here. The islanders believe words invite shadows." Poirot gave a gentle, amused shrug. "And yet, monsieur, I fear shadows have already arrived." They began walking up the sloping path that led toward the villa. The cobblestones were slick from mist, the incline steep enough to quicken the breath. Along the way, olive trees twisted like ancient sentinels, their branches reaching out as though to warn or hinder. The air grew cooler the higher they climbed, threaded with a strange metallic scent. Poirot noticed it instantly. "You smell it too," Papadakis whispered. "Yes." Poirot inhaled again, more deeply. "Blood," he murmured. "Old, but not forgotten." Papadakis crossed himself. Poirot pretended not to notice. At last, they reached the cliff's crest. The Oracle's Rest loomed before them, stark and pale against the darkening sky. It was a mansion of marble and age, constructed in a style older than the island's modern buildings. Tall columns flanked the entrance. Ivy clung to its walls like veins. But it was the silence that struck. Poirot most, thick, unnatural, as if the very air held its breath. They stepped inside. The interior smelled faintly of incense, sea air, and the lingering trace of something bitter, chemical, unnatural. Poirot removed his hat, adjusting his moustache with 2 careful fingers. "The scene," he said quietly. Papadakis led him down a long hallway lit by dim oil lamps. Their footsteps echoed faintly, revealing the villa's emptiness. At last, they emerged onto a terrace overlooking the sea. The marble steps leading down toward the cliff's edge glowed faintly under the rising moon. And there, dried into the porous stone, was the blood. Poirot approached slowly, kneeling with the grace of a man who had practiced such motions many times. He ran a fingertip near the darkened stain, not touching, observing. "Alexandros Myris," Papadakis said from behind him. "Wealthy patron of archaeology, occasional donor to the government, popular enough until today." Poirot studied the blood again. The droplets did not form a natural pattern of collapse or fall. They sprayed in a direction inconsistent with gravity. "Not a fall," Poirot murmured. "A struggle, but brief." Papadakis swallowed. "The housekeeper found him here at sunset. His face was contorted. The doctor said perhaps poison, but he is not certain." Poirot's eyes drifted to the stone nearby. A goblet. He lifted it delicately with a cloth. Its stem was elegant, carved from a metal older than the villa itself. And around the rim lingered a faint scent. Bitter almonds. Poirot nodded once. "Cyanide," Papadakis paled. "You are certain?" "As certain as one may be of the sun rising," Poirot said. "But the question, Inspector, is whether he drank willingly, or was compelled." He stood scanning the scene. Then he saw it. Footprints, not large, not heavy. one small narrow imprint pressed lightly into the thin dust near the step, the kind made by a slipper or delicate shoe, but only one print, the other missing. Poirot's moustaches dipped thoughtfully. "A curious thing," he said quietly. "A murderer who leaves half an impression. It is almost poetic." Papadakis moved closer. "Do you think it belongs to the housekeeper?" Poirot said nothing. He merely looked out to sea. They returned inside, where the oil lamps flickered against murals depicting mythological scenes, the Oracle of Delphi, Apollo's lyre, the twin ravens of prophecy. The villa seemed to pulse with ancient breath. Papadakis cleared his throat. "The suspects are waiting in the Grand Hall. All of them were at the villa today, though they claim different reasons." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Introduce them to me, if you please." Together they entered a cavernous hall, where 4 figures stood scattered, like chess pieces awaiting their order. But one drew Poirot's attention immediately. A woman, middle-aged, her posture meek, her hair in a tight braid. She wrung her apron with trembling fingers. Daphne Kyriakos, housekeeper. She looked up as they entered, fear and grief wrestling in her eyes. Poirot approached her with gentle steps. "Madame," he said softly, "you discovered the body. You must have suffered a terrible fright." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I went to fetch him for supper. He always watched the sunset every evening, but he did not return." Her voice trembled. "When I saw him, lying there, I knew something unholy had happened." Poirot looked at her closely. "Unholy, you say? Why such a word?" Her gaze darted toward the ceiling, as though expecting something to descend. "This house, the Oracle's house, it remembers things, bad things. My grandmother told stories. The family should never have returned here." Poirot tilted his head, "But Alexandros Myris chose to live here." She hesitated. "He said the oracle spoke to him." Poirot blinked. "Pardon? He believed the villa held secrets, ancient ones. He spent countless nights in the lower chambers. He collected artifacts no one else should touch." Poirot stored this away silently. "Your master seems to have been a man of many interests." Daphne shivered. "Interests best left to the dead." Poirot turned his attention to the next figure, a young woman with smooth dark hair, her posture regal, her expression unreadable. Elena Vardis, the niece and sole heir. She met Poirot's gaze with quiet steel. "You may ask your questions, Monsieur Poirot. I will answer what I can, but I did not kill my uncle." Poirot bowed slightly. "Then we shall speak, mademoiselle, with clarity and patience. Truth comes more swiftly when not chased." Elena's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "You will find the truth uncomfortable, I warn you. My uncle was a difficult man. And yet you lived with him." "For convenience," she said coldly, "and because he insisted I be near. But affection, admiration, those died long ago." Poirot nodded. "And where were you when he went to watch the sunset?" "In my room," she replied, "reading, alone." Poirot made no comment, though the absence of witnesses always interested him. The third suspect approached before being summoned. Marcus Leclerc. Tall, thin, with restless hands, and the air of a man whose intellect burned too fiercely for his own peace. A French archaeologist by reputation, but reputation, Poirot knew, could be a fragile thing. "I suppose you know I argued with Alexandros yesterday," Marcus said immediately. "Inspector Papadakis seems eager to point this out." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "I do not assume guilt based on raised voices, monsieur, but raised tempers often reveal truths." Marcus laughed sharply. "Truths? Alexandros Myris collected artifacts like a vulture gathers bones. He purchased relics he had no right to. I confronted him. He laughed. And what did you do in response? I stormed. Away, Marcus snapped. Not murder. I am a scholar, not a butcher. Poirot noticed the way Marcus's fingers twitched, as though grasping at invisible stone tablets. Then the final suspect stepped from the shadows. Nikos Stavros, a fisherman built like the cliffs themselves, broad, weathered, carved by the sea. His eyes were storm-dark, his expression grave. I had no reason to kill him, Nikos said before Poirot spoke. Even if he stole my father's land, even if he ruined our family. Poirot met his gaze. Bitterness is a sharp blade, monsieur. It cuts both outward and inward. Nikos snorted. I do not waste time with blades. The sea teaches patience. And yet, Poirot murmured, the sea also hides many truths. A silence settled. A deep, resonant silence that hummed against the stone walls. Poirot stepped back, observing the four of them, not as individuals, but as pieces of a puzzle. Each held a motive, each an opportunity. But only one held the truth. Poirot exhaled slowly, feeling the island itself shift as night deepened. Outside, waves crashed against the cliff with a mournful rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cried, a thin, lonely sound swallowed by wind. Monsieur Poirot, Papadakis said softly, what now? Poirot's eyes shone. Now, he said, the investigation begins. He lifted the goblet once more, inhaling its poisoned scent. And murder, Inspector, he added quietly, never hides well on an island. Chapter 2. The Suspects Assemble. A pall of unease hung over the villa as night descended upon Kalinos. The oracle's rest, so silent earlier that evening, now seemed to pulse faintly with the energy of bodies' voices and unspoken fears gathered within its ancient walls. The lamps flickered with strange hesitation, as if reluctant to reveal what lurked in the shadows. Poirot felt the shift like a subtle tightening of invisible strings. A stage being prepared for the first act of a dark performance. Inspector Papadakis led Poirot through a series of arched doorways until they approached the grand hall. As they walked, Poirot's polished shoes clicked lightly on the marble floor, each step reflecting his growing anticipation. The air smelled of sea salt, sandalwood, and the nervous sweat of those waiting beyond the doors. Are they all inside? Poirot asked gently, adjusting the crease of his cuff. Papadakis nodded. Yes, all four were in the villa this afternoon. Some claim coincidence. Others refuse to say anything until you question them. Poirot paused before the doors. And you, Inspector, what do you fear most? Papadakis blinked, caught off guard. Fear? Yes, you tremble slightly. It is not the cold. The man swallowed, his throat bobbing. This house, it has a history. Old families, older grudges. There were rumours, even before the death, strange noises, lights at night when no one walked the halls. Poirot raised a finger. Rumours, monsieur, are the gossip of frightened minds. Murder, however, is always the work of a human hand. Let us seek that truth. With that, he pushed open the double doors. The hall was vast, lit by tall wrought-iron lamps casting golden halos across columns and frescoes. The frescoes depicted scenes of ancient prophecy. Priests in white robes, supplicants kneeling before a veiled oracle, carved symbols spiraling upward like smoke. Shadows clung to the edges of the room, deep enough to swallow secrets whole. 4 figures stood apart, each an island unto themselves. Poirot's entrance was met first by silence, thick, expectant. 4 pairs of eyes shifted toward him, measuring, searching, calculating. He smiled gently. Mesdames, messieurs, he said with a slight bow, thank you for assembling. I understand this is a time of distress, but I assure you, Hercule Poirot seeks not to accuse unjustly, but to understand. His gaze swept the room, noting stance, expression, breath, and the small betrayals of posture that so often revealed guilt. "Let us begin," Poirot said softly, "with the simple matters. You are here, in this villa, because each of you was connected to Alexandros Myris, and therefore each of you carries a piece of his final day. You may not yet realize which piece belongs to whom, but together we shall form the picture." The first to speak was Eleanor Vardis. She stepped forward with quiet confidence, her dress of midnight blue rustling softly. She possessed the poise of someone who had grown accustomed to being observed, yet refused to be defined by the gazes of others. Her eyes were dark, controlled, as though she had trained them to reveal only what she wished the world to see. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice calm, "I should like to speak first." Poirot inclined his head. "But of course, mademoiselle. My uncle," she began, "was a difficult man. You will hear that from all of us, in one manner or another. But do not mistake difficulty for wickedness. He was complicated, brilliant, ambitious, and consumed by the pursuits that filled his life." "The artifacts," Poirot murmured. She nodded. "Yes, his collection was his obsession. He believed the Oracle's Rest was built upon ancient ground, a sacred site. Perhaps he was right, but obsession, Monsieur Poirot, is rarely contained. It spills into everything, into relationships, into decisions, into tempers." "And did you argue often?" Poirot asked, watching her eyes. Her lashes fluttered. "Argue? No. To argue implies we were equals in the discussion. My uncle did not argue. He dictated. And you obeyed. I endured," she said simply. Poirot admired the honesty. But endurance could foster resentment. Resentment could simmer into fury, and fury, under the right circumstances, could turn deadly. "And where were you this evening?" he asked. "I told Inspector Papadakis, in my room. I had a book and a headache. I remained there until I heard Daphne scream." "And there is no one who can confirm this?" "No," Elena answered. "I was alone." Poirot nodded, neither condemning nor exonerating. "Merci, mademoiselle. We shall speak further." She stepped back with dignity, though Poirot sensed a tremor beneath the stillness of her hands. Next stepped forward Marcus Leclerc. He looked as though sleep had abandoned him long before this night. His eyes, etched with fatigue and frustration, darted from Poirot to the frescoes and back again, as if seeking answers in the ancient painted walls. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, attempting a polite incline of the head, "before any accusations fly, and they will, I know, they must be tempered by logic. I had disagreements with Alexandros, yes, many, but disagreements do not constitute murder." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Let us begin with the nature of these disagreements," Marcus exhaled sharply. "He purchased relics in ways that skirted legality. He claimed ownership over discoveries he had no right to. He interfered in my own excavations. He even attempted to claim credit for a find that was solely my own." Poirot's voice softened. Such actions would anger any scholar. "Anger?" Marcus spat. "They would ruin my career." He caught himself, smoothing his hair as though trying to rebuild composure. "But I am not a killer. I have dedicated my life to preserving history, not destroying those who pursue it." "And yet," Poirot noted gently, "passion can be a volatile thing. You stormed away yesterday from an argument. Where did you go after?" "To the library," Marcus said. "To organize my notes. I remained there until dinner." "Alone?" Poirot asked. "Yes," Marcus replied with bitterness. "It seems solitude is a theme tonight." Poirot tucked that statement away. "Merci, Monsieur Leclerc." Marcus stepped back but continued muttering under his breath. pacing in agitated circles like a caged animal. Daphne Kyriakos approached timidly next. She moved with the hesitance of someone who feared each step might draw unwelcome attention. Her hands clutched her apron, wringing the fabric into tortured folds. Her eyes were wide, glistening with worry and grief. "Mr. Poirot," she whispered, her accent soft, "I did not harm my master. I served him faithfully for 12 years. I cooked his meals, cleaned his rooms, cared for him when he was unwell." Poirot studied her closely. "You were fond of him?" A shadow passed over her features. "Fond? I respected him, but affection. He was not an easy man to love." "And you discovered the body," Poirot said gently. Her voice cracked. "I did. I went to fetch him for the evening meal. He always watched the sunset. He said it gave him strength, clarity. But tonight, when I found him, his face, his eyes—" She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Poirot stepped. "Closer. Madame, take your time." "The goblet was beside him," she whispered. "I did not touch it, I swear. I ran to call for help." "Did you notice anyone near the terrace?" "No, but the air, it felt cold, as if someone had just left." Poirot nodded, filing every detail meticulously within the order of his little grey cells. "And earlier today," he asked, "did anything seem unusual?" Daphne hesitated. "Yes," she finally whispered, "but I am afraid to speak it." Poirot leaned in gently. "Courage, madame. Murder thrives in silence." A tear slid down her cheek. "I saw Elena going toward the storage room. She looked upset, angry, and later I found the storage room key missing." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "But later the key returned?" Daphne nodded. "Placed back neatly, too neatly." "Merci, Madame Kyriakos," Poirot said softly. "You have been very helpful." She stepped back, eyes lowered, shoulders hunched. Now only one suspect remained, Nikos Stavros. He did not step forward so much as loom, his presence filling the room with the solidity of a cliff face resisting an incoming tide. His arms were crossed over his chest, forearms thick from a lifetime of wrestling with nets, ropes, and storms. His dark hair was dishevelled, salt still clinging to it as though he had come fresh from the sea. Poirot approached him without hesitation. "Monsieur Stavros," Poirot said, "you had strong feelings toward the victim, no?" Nikos snorted, a low, humourless sound. "Strong enough. Alexandros took my family's land, forced us to the lower docks. My father died with a broken heart." "And yet," Poirot said, "you claim no desire for revenge." Nikos leaned forward, voice low. "If I wanted revenge, Monsieur Poirot, I would not hide behind poison like a coward. I face my enemies in the open." Poirot considered this. "And where were you at sunset?" "Repairing my boat. The storm last week damaged the mooring. I had to fix it before tonight's tide." "And who can confirm this?" "My brother," Nikos grunted, "but he is in the village." Poirot nodded. "Very well." A silence settled again, thicker this time, a fabric woven of tension, suspicion, and the quiet drum of fear. Poirot stepped to the centre of the room. "Mesdames and messieurs," he began, "you have all shared your stories. They form an interesting puzzle, but one with missing pieces. Your host, Alexandros Miris, died not merely from poison, but from the culmination of many grievances, secrets, and desires." The suspect shifted uneasily. Poirot continued, voice calm but firm. "But do not fear. Hercule Poirot sees what others do not. I see the guilt within gestures, the truth in pauses, the meaning in silence, and already there are contradictions among your statements, small ones perhaps, but they will grow." Marcus stiffened. Elena folded her arms tightly. Daphne looked ready to faint. Nikos stared defiantly. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Tonight I shall examine the villa more closely, and tomorrow I shall speak with each of you again at length." Papadakis exhaled, relieved yet uneasy. Poirot turned toward the frescoes once more, noting how shadows stretched across the painted oracle's veiled face. "Murder, mes amis," he said softly, "is a game of truth and deception, and here, in this house of prophecy, the truth will be revealed." Lightning flickered beyond the window. A lamp sputtered, and somewhere deep within the villa, a floorboard creaked. Chapter 3. Shadows Beneath the Olive Trees. The sun was only beginning to lift its molten crown over Calistron's whitewashed cliffs when Hercule Poirot stepped out onto the villa's terrace, the smell of salt, thyme, and dew-soaked earth filtering through the morning haze. The island, peaceful in the deceptive innocence of early light, seemed wholly unaware of the dark secret that now lay upon it. But Poirot knew better. Evil, he reflected, was often most active in beautiful places, for it could hide itself behind nature's serenity. And on this island, secluded, tightly knit, fiercely proud, evil had taken the shape of murder. Poirot had slept little. His mind had churned through the sparse facts like a meticulous machine. A wealthy and controversial magnate dead, a locked terrace, a missing wine glass, and the curious fact that the sea, normally the loudest presence on Calistran, had seemed strangely quiet at the moment of the discovery. It was a small detail, but small details were what made Hercule Poirot the investigator he was. The sea was rarely quiet, unless someone needed it to be. He met Inspector Nicasse on the rugged path leading toward the olive groves. The inspector, already sweating despite the early hour, looked troubled. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "the villagers do not wish to speak. They claim the dead man was cursed for his greed, and that questioning them will only invite trouble. Superstitious nonsense." Poirot smiled gently. "Nonsense, perhaps. But superstition, mon ami, has a way of hiding truths inside itself. The villagers hide something, not because they fear curses, but because they fear people." They continued through the grove, sunlight catching in silver streaks on the olive leaves. A faint wind stirred them, whispering soft, sibilant secrets. Poirot paused as he noticed broken twigs forming a small, disturbed patch of earth. He bent, examining the soil. "A footprint," he murmured, "compressed at the heel, the mark of someone carrying weight, and this," he plucked a tiny red thread from a branch. "The colour is distinctive, is it not?" Inspector Nicasse frowned. "Madame Eleni wore red last night." "Indeed," Poirot said, pocketing the thread. "But colour alone is not guilt. It merely tells me she, or something belonging to her, was here recently." They reached a small, stone chapel overlooking the sea. Behind it, hidden between two slabs of rock, lay the object Nicasse had summoned him to see. A bronze medallion engraved with a labyrinth. Poirot lifted it carefully. The workmanship was exquisite, ancient yet remarkably well preserved. "This is no trinket," he said softly. "It belongs to someone of importance." "To the victim?" Nicasse asked. "No," Poirot replied. "To one of the suspects." They returned to the villa, which now felt less like a summer retreat and more like a pressure kettle waiting to burst. The household had gathered in the atrium. 3 individuals who had, during the night, transformed from guests into suspects. Their varied expressions painted a vivid tableau of guilt, indignation, and something Poirot recognized instantly: fear. Madame Eleni Papadakis, her red silk shawl draped over her arm, stood nearest the window, eyes narrowed with aristocratic impatience. "Inspector," she said sharply, "this questioning must end. My husband is due to arrive from Athens, and I will not tolerate humiliation." "My dear madame," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "Humiliation comes not from questions, but from answers." She stiffened. Across from her stood Dr. Leon Marcos, medical psychologist, his round spectacles catching glints of the afternoon light. He had the calm of a man accustomed to observing others, but Poirot noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way he seemed to study every gesture in the room, as though he were cataloguing reactions, or hiding his own. Near the archway lingered Andreas Vasilis, the young boatman whose sunburnt skin and restless movements gave him the restless air of someone who longed to be anywhere but here. His eyes darted to the door, then back to Poirot. He looked trapped. Poirot began gently, almost conversationally. "A medallion has been found among the rocks by the chapel. A curious artifact. Perhaps one of you knows to whom it belongs?" Madame Eleni's eyes flickered, just briefly before she set her jaw. "I have no interest in pagan trinkets." Dr. Marcos stepped forward, voice calm. "It is a Minoan ceremonial emblem, quite valuable. I examined a similar one in a museum in Heraklion, but this particular piece, no, I do not recognize it." Andreas clenched his fists. "Why would I know anything about ancient things? I work on boats. I have no use for old metal." Poirot nodded, though he did not believe a word from any of them. The conversation continued, each suspect revealing little, while trying not to reveal too much. Poirot filed every gesture, every hesitation, every contradiction inside his precise little system of order. Nothing was wasted, nothing ignored. And when he finally turned away, it was with the quiet certainty that the medallion would connect at least two of them. Later, after the uneasy gathering had dispersed, Poirot retreated to the terraces once more. The air had grown thick with the scent of drying herbs, and cicadas began their evening chorus. He stood overlooking the sea, the rhythmic pulse of waves far below steadying his thoughts. "There is a secret," he whispered to himself, "a secret tangled in the past of this island." He heard footsteps behind him, soft, hesitant. Turning, he saw Andreas again, twisting his cap in his hands. "Monsieur Poirot," he stammered, I want to tell you something, but not here, not in the villa." Poirot tilted his head. "Where then, mon garçon?" "The old watchtower," Andreas said. "At dusk. I will explain everything." Poirot felt the shift in the air, like a bowstring tightening. "You have my word. I will be there," he replied. But as Andreas turned to leave, something thudded in the distance. A muffled cry followed, cut short. Poirot froze. "Andreas!" he called sharply. No answer. Poirot hurried toward the source of the sound. The path curved between two tall olive trees, shadows growing long and menacing. A shape lay crumpled on the ground, a discarded cap, Andreas's cap. But the young man himself was nowhere to be found. Poirot picked up the cap, heart hammering with knowledge and dread. Someone had silenced Andreas, and they had done it minutes before he could reveal the truth. Chapter 4. The Vanishing at Dusk. Dusk descended over Calistran with an unsettling swiftness, as though the sun, eager to escape the island's burden of secrets, had plunged itself behind the mountains without a final glance. The sky darkened to a bruised indigo, and the first stars trembled above the jagged cliffs. Hercule Poirot stood beneath the ancient olive tree where Andreas's cap had been abandoned, the soft leather now dusted with dirt, as if in accusation. The young man's disappearance gnawed at him, not merely for the danger implied, but because Andreas had been on the verge of confession. And to Poirot, nothing was more suspicious than a man silenced at the moment he tries to speak. Inspector Nicholas arrived breathlessly, lantern in hand, its flickering glow stretching nervous shadows across the ground. "Poirot," he said anxiously, "I have alerted my men. They are searching the western paths, but Andreas, he knows this island better than any of us. If he vanished willingly—" "He did not vanish willingly," Poirot interrupted. "A man does not cast aside his only cap in the growing cold of evening. No, mon ami, he was taken or lured." They followed a faint trail leading down a narrow slope, the stones slick with moisture from the encroaching night air. The silence of the island had taken on a different character now. Not peaceful, but watchful. Poirot felt it. A kind of anticipatory hush that seemed to cling to the air, vibrating with the tension of pursuit. At the foot of the slope, they found a broken branch and a long scrape in the dirt, as though something heavy had been dragged. Inspector Nicholas grimaced. "This is bad, very bad." Poirot examined the ground. "Look," he said quietly. "Drops of wine? No, not wine." He touched a finger to a dark stain, then sniffed. "Olive oil, fresh. Someone spilled it while struggling." The inspector frowned. "Oil? Why would—" "Because," Poirot said, eyes sharpening, "it came from the amphora found next to the body of Leonidas Vathrakis. The oil was used to coat the terrace floor before the murder, to make the scene appear as though the victim slipped." Inspector Nicholas went pale. "Then the killer is tying loose ends." "Oui," Poirot murmured. "The killer seeks to control the narrative. And Andreas knew something that jeopardized that control." They reached the lower cliffs overlooking the sea. There, the trail ended abruptly, as though swallowed by the earth itself. Below them, the waves crashed far more violently now that darkness had fallen, white foam slashing at the rocks. If Andreas had been pushed— Poirot dismissed the thought. A body would eventually wash ashore. Yet deep within, he felt Andreas was still alive. Fearful, perhaps bleeding, but alive. They returned to the villa, where an uneasy gloom had settled. The once bright lanterns now cast a sickly, wavering light across the hall. Madame Eleni paced, her red shawl sliding off her shoulders like a wounded banner. Dr. Marcos scribbled in a leather notebook, glancing up every few seconds as though expecting danger to emerge from the very walls. And beside a marble pillar stood a figure Poirot had not noticed earlier. A tall, thin man, with a face as smooth and expressionless as polished stone. "Ah," the inspector said stiffly, "this is Constantine Papadakis, Madame Eleni's husband. He arrived on the evening ferry." Papadakis bowed slightly. "Monsieur Poirot, I have heard you are investigating my cousin's unfortunate death." Poirot observed him carefully. The man's voice was too even, his posture too precise. But it was the eyes that struck him most. Dark, unmoving, as though carved rather than alive. "I investigate the truth," Poirot replied. "And the truth, Monsieur Papadakis, is rarely unfortunate. It is merely inconvenient." Papadakis's lips tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot's gaze shifted to the shawl draped around Madame Eleni's arm. The red thread he had found that morning nestled in his pocket suddenly felt heavier. "Madame," he said, "may I inquire where you were just before sunset?" Her reaction was instant and explosive. "Must I be interrogated like a criminal? I was here, in my room, writing to my sister. Ask anyone." Poirot nodded politely, though he registered the tremor in her voice. He turned next to Dr. Marcos. "And you, doctor, you were not present during the commotion outside." Dr. Marcos hesitated. I was in the library, reading. I heard nothing until Inspector Nicholas summoned us." Another lie, Poirot thought. No one in the villa could have missed the shouts, the footsteps, the brief flare of panic that had swept like a gust of flame. Why had Marcos pretended otherwise? Dinner was abandoned. The villa felt too tense, too uncertain. Poirot withdrew to the garden terrace to think. The island's night insects pulsed in rhythmic chirps, but behind their natural chorus lay another sound, the echo of a warning. Poirot sensed the murder was more than a simple killing. It was a carefully woven web of motive, history, and inheritance. Leonidas Vathrakis had been on the verge of some announcement, perhaps a new will, perhaps a business deal, and his death had prevented it. But Andreas? Why silence a boatman? Unless the boy had seen something? Poirot's thoughts froze as he noticed something glinting near a row of potted basil plants. Kneeling, he retrieved a thin metal object, an antique key, tarnished but unmistakably part of a set. Its bow was shaped like the same labyrinth engraved on the medallion found earlier. "Mon Dieu!" Poirot whispered. "A connection between the relic and the villa." Footsteps approached. Poirot rose swiftly, the key hidden in his palm. Constantine Papadakis emerged from the shadows, his expression unreadable. "Monsieur Poirot," he said smoothly, "I could not help but notice you examining the garden. Are you searching for something?" Poirot smiled calmly. "Always, monsieur, but fortunately the garden is generous." Papadakis stepped closer. "Be careful where you dig. Old things buried on this island are often better left undisturbed." The warning hung in the air like the edge of a blade. Papadakis turned and disappeared into the villa. Poirot exhaled slowly, then looked again at the key glinting faintly in the moonlight. It belonged to a door he had not yet discovered, one that would open onto truths the island had guarded fiercely. A sudden crack sounded in the distance, sharp, metallic. Poirot's head snapped up. A lantern had gone out on the far balcony. Someone was moving there, and Poirot knew instantly, instinctively, that whoever it was had not come to enjoy the night air. They had come to hide something. Chapter 5. The Balcony of Whispers. The extinguished lantern still smouldered faintly, a ghostly wisp of smoke rising and dissolving into the night air as Poirot stepped onto the far balcony. The marble tiles beneath his polished shoes glimmered in the pale moonlight, carved with delicate patterns that in daylight appeared decorative, yet tonight felt uncanny, like symbols in an unfinished riddle. A cold breeze swept over the cliff face, rattling the vines twisting along the stone columns. Poirot paused, senses sharpened. Someone had been here moments before. Someone determined not to be seen. A faint scrape echoed near the far end of the balcony, barely audible, like fabric brushing stone. Poirot advanced slowly, his silhouette stretching long and thin across the tiles. He reached the end of the terrace, where an ornate wooden cabinet stood against the wall, its doors slightly ajar. Beneath it lay a scattering of dust and small wooden shavings, fresh, disturbed. Poirot opened the cabinet fully. Inside were wine glasses, service trays, and, most curious of all, a hollow space behind a loose panel. "Ah," Poirot breathed, "a hiding place." Within that cavity lay a small object wrapped in cloth. Carefully, gently, Poirot withdrew it. The cloth unfurled to reveal a second medallion, twinned with the one found at the chapel. But this one bore deeper scratches, as if someone had tried desperately to remove markings from its surface. Poirot held it up to the light. The labyrinth engraving gleamed faintly. Footsteps approached behind him. Inspector Nickers hurried forward, cheeks flushed. "Poirot! There has been another sighting. A fisherman claims he saw a small boat leaving the North Cove, just after sunset." Poirot tucked the medallion inside his coat. A boat? Was it Andreas? He could not tell. only that someone moved quickly, rowing in haste. Nicus hesitated. Poirot, what if Andreas fled? What if he lied about wanting to talk? Poirot shook his head. No, mon ami. Andreas did not run away. He was taken away. And whoever used that boat knew the island well enough to choose the one cove where lantern light does not reach. Nicus exhaled shakily. Then we must search the northern cliffs. In due time, Poirot said. But first we must understand why the killer hid this medallion within the villa. He tapped the cabinet door. It means the conspiracy is not merely between individuals, but between the island's past and its present. They returned indoors. But as they entered the hall, Poirot stopped suddenly. Voices drifted from the drawing room, sharp, heated, fraying at the edges like old rope. Madame Eleni stood rigidly near the fireplace, her red shawl falling in turbulent folds. Across from her, Constantine Papadakis loomed like a storm cloud, eyes cold and unblinking. Between them, Dr. Marcos paced nervously, adjusting his glasses in small, agitated jerks. You jeopardize everything, Constantine was saying. This investigation must end. It will not end simply because you command it, Eleni snapped, chin lifting. And if you think I will remain silent— Silence, Constantine whispered, is the only thing keeping this family intact. Poirot stepped into the room. Bonsoir, mes amis. It seems the night stirs more unrest than the daylight ever did. Constantine stiffened. This is a family matter. Poirot smiled pleasantly. When one member of the family is dead, monsieur, it becomes a matter for us all. Dr. Marcos cleared his throat, then addressed Poirot. Inspector Nicus informed us that Andreas may have fled the island. This is good news, is it not? It means no harm has come to him. Poirot leaned forward. Doctor, you speak with surprising certainty for someone who claims to know so little about the events of the night. Marcos paled. I only meant— Poirot cut him off gently. Perhaps you meant only to calm the atmosphere, yes? But instead, you have added to my curiosity. Constantine's dark gaze flicked toward the red shawl draped across Eleni's arm. Eleni, he said softly, tell Monsieur Poirot where you were during dusk. I have already told him, she said, in my room. Poirot folded his hands. Then, may I ask, did you leave your shawl in the olive grove earlier today? Her breath caught. My shawl! No! Why would I? But Poirot saw it, the flash of panic. The involuntary glance toward her husband, the tightening of Constantine's lips, as though he might snap the air itself in two. Poirot decided not to press further, not yet. Instead, he excused himself and slipped into the hallway. The villa, large and labyrinthine, had places no guest ever ventured. Poirot had long suspected there was more to its construction than met the eye. The old key he had found surely opened something here. Some door, some chamber left forgotten or purposefully hidden. As he wandered the dimly lit corridor, he noticed a slight draught. He followed it to an alcove holding a tall carved wooden statue of Theseus battling the Minotaur. Behind it, almost imperceptible, was a seam in the wall. Poirot touched the seam. It moved. A secret door, he whispered. Carefully, he pressed against the panel. It creaked open, revealing a narrow stone stairway descending into darkness. He lit a candle from a nearby lantern and began his descent. The steps spiraled downward, air growing cooler, heavier, tinged with the scent of damp limestone. The staircase emptied into a small chamber carved directly into the cliff itself. Inside were old crates, woven baskets, and a row of ceramic amphorae, some cracked, others pristine. But it was the last object that made Poirot freeze. A torn scrap of fabric, brown, coarse, unmistakable. It belonged to Andreas's work shirt. Poirot knelt, lifting the scrap gently. It had been ripped violently. Nearby, on the dirt floor, lay something even more alarming. A small, broken switchblade with traces of dried blood staining its hinge. "Andreas," Poirot murmured, heart tightening. He stood slowly, raising the candle higher. Shadows danced across the stone walls until the light revealed something unmistakable. Footprints, several of them, leading deeper into a second tunnel. But one set was larger, heavier, and unmistakably deliberate. Poirot's heartbeat quickened. Someone had dragged Andreas through this hidden passage, and they were still using this underground route. A faint metallic clang echoed from the tunnel, like a door being shut. Poirot spun toward the sound just as the candle sputtered violently. Chapter 6. The Tunnel of Echoes. The darkness swallowed Poirot instantly, thick and absolute, as if the stone throat of the island had closed around him. For a moment he stood perfectly still, breathing slow, precise breaths, while his senses recalibrated. The candle lay extinguished at his feet, its flame smothered by a sudden gust that should not have existed underground. Someone had created that gust. Someone had moved behind him. He reached for the matches in his pocket. The first one snapped. The second flickered weakly, painting a faint halo that barely pierced the gloom. At last, the third match caught properly, and Poirot relit the candle. Its fragile glow shuddered against the cave walls, casting monstrous, stretching shadows. "Courage, Hercule," he murmured to himself. "The darkness. It is only an absence of order. You must impose your little grey cells upon it." He advanced slowly, following the footprints that led deeper into the tunnel. The air grew colder, carrying with it a low hum, like the faint echo of distant waves striking a hollow stone chamber. And then, mingled with that sound, came something else, a muffled cough. Poirot froze. He held his breath. Another cough, weak, pained. "Andreas," Poirot whispered. Moving swiftly now, he followed the sound until he reached a narrow arch opening into a wider cavern. There, illuminated by faint moonlight seeping through a crack in the rock above, lay a sight that seized Poirot's heart. Andreas Vasilis, bound at the wrists, slumped against a crate. His head was bowed, curls matted with dirt and sweat, but his chest rose shallowly. He was alive. Poirot rushed forward. "Andreas, mon garçon!" The young man stirred, wincing as Poirot loosened the ropes with trembling fingers. "Monsieur, I tried." His voice was barely a thread. "Do not speak yet," Poirot said soothingly. "Save your strength." But Andreas shook his head weakly. "No, you must know. Before he returns." Poirot stiffened. "He? Who, Andreas? Who brought you here?" But before the boy could answer, a harsh metallic sound echoed from the tunnel behind them. The unmistakable clank of a gate being unlocked. Poirot extinguished the candle instantly. Darkness closed over them once more, but the moon's thin beam still marked the cavern floor. Footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. Poirot crouched beside Andreas, positioning himself between the boy and the sound. From the shadows emerged a tall, broad figure. The silhouette paused at the entrance, surveying the cavern. Poirot held his breath. The figure shifted, and for a moment the moonlight brushed a familiar profile. The angular jaw, the rigid posture, Constantine Papadakis. He carried a lantern this time, its light slicing into the darkness, revealing Andreas tied or untied depending on angle. Poirot's mind raced. Had Constantine seen the cut ropes? Had he seen Poirot's shadow? "Still alive," Constantine muttered under his breath, his Greek accent thicker when he was alone. "Why won't you just drown like the others?" Poirot's blood chilled. The others? How many victims had there been? Constantine stepped forward. Poirot tensed, ready to spring, though he was no match for the man's brute strength. But before Constantine drew close, another sound cut through the chamber. Voices, 2 of them. Poirot recognized one instantly. Inspector Nikas, breathless and urgent. "Papadakis, stop where you are!" A gun cocked sharply. The lantern's glow swung wildly as Constantine turned, fury twisting his features. "You again," he spat. "You meddle where you do not belong." Nikas advanced cautiously. "Put the lantern down. Step away." Constantine did not obey. Instead, he reached for something behind him. Poirot couldn't see the object, but his instincts screamed danger. In a flash, Poirot rose from his hiding place. "Monsieur Papadakis," he said sharply, stepping into the lantern's full light, "you will oblige Inspector Nikas by doing as he commands." Constantine froze, shock flickering across his face. "You!" he hissed. "I knew you were sniffing where you should not. You and your ridiculous little—" But he never finished. Andreas, summoning the last of his strength, pushed himself upright and shouted, "He killed Leonidas!" Constantine lunged, abandoning stealth entirely. The cavern exploded into chaos. Nikas fired a warning shot that sparked against the stone wall. Constantine ducked, grabbing an abandoned oar and swinging it like a club. Poirot shielded Andreas as debris fell around them, dust rising in choking clouds. "Stop, Papadakis!" Nikas shouted, firing a second shot. Constantine dropped the lantern. Darkness returned, violent, absolute. Poirot felt more than saw movement. Heavy boots striking stone, a desperate scramble, a rush of air as a large body sprinted past the crates toward the far opening. "After him!" Nikas shouted. "There's another exit!" But Poirot did not follow. He turned to Andreas, who now leaned heavily against him. "My boy, you must tell me what you know," Poirot urged. Andreas swallowed painfully. I saw him. On the night Leonidas died. Constantine, he met someone at the old watchtower. They argued. Leonidas wanted to expose something, papers, money, I don't know. Constantine said the family would burn before losing control." Poirot's mind spun with new clarity. So Leonidas had uncovered a conspiracy, something ancient perhaps tied to these medallions, and Constantine killed him to silence him. But Andreas shook his head fiercely. No, Constantine wasn't alone. There was another. Someone he trusted, someone in the villa. Poirot leaned closer. "Who, Andreas? Tell me." But the boy's breath faltered. His eyelids fluttered. He slumped forward, unconscious. Inspector Nikas returned moments later, panting. "He escaped," he said bitterly. "He knows these tunnels too well." Poirot rose slowly. His face was pale, but his eyes blazed with controlled fury. "Inspector," he said, quietly, "Constantine is not the mastermind. He is merely the shield. The true architect of this conspiracy walks freely above us, charming, educated, and very, very dangerous." Nikas stared at him. "Who?" Poirot picked up the scratched medallion he had hidden earlier and held it toward the moonbeam. A faint inscription glimmered, an initial barely visible beneath the attempted scratches. "An M," Poirot said, "and only one person in this villa signs his belongings with such flourish." Nikas's eyes widened. "Dr. Marcos?" A distant boom reverberated through the tunnel, the villa's alarm bell. Poirot turned sharply. "Come, Inspector. The doctor has realized Andreas talked." He extinguished the last of the light. "And he will kill again tonight." Chapter 7. Whispers Beneath the Olive Trees. The moon climbed high over the island as Hercule Poirot led the small procession down the narrow path that wound between ancient olive trees. Their gnarled trunks cast twisting shadows, like fingers pointing accusingly toward every traveller who dared pass. The air was cooler here, scented with earth and distant seawater, and the cicadas had grown quiet, as though they too sensed that the night had become heavy with revelation. Poirot walked slowly, cane tapping rhythmically. Behind him trailed Inspector Callistratos, whose torchlight danced along the stones. Then came Helena Marcos, pale but determined, followed by Demetrius Kargas, whose usual confidence faltered under the weight of the unfolding mystery. "Where are you taking us, Monsieur Poirot?" Callistratos asked, though not impatiently. Curiosity had replaced his earlier skepticism. "To the place where truth and deception meet, mon ami," Poirot replied, "a place our victim visited shortly before his untimely death. Monsieur Lysander Papadakis came to this grove the night he died, and it is here that a secret was buried." Helena inhaled sharply. "You believe he met someone here?" Poirot inclined his head. "I know he did." They approached a crumbling stone altar, half swallowed by creeping vines. Once it had belonged to a small rural shrine. Abandoned after the war, its goddess forgotten by all except the elderly who occasionally whispered old myths. Poirot circled it carefully, studying the ground with the precision of a jeweller examining a flawed diamond. At last he found what he sought. "Behold," he murmured, pointing to the faintest scuff in the dirt. A footprint, nearly erased by wind, yet still discernible to the trained eye. It is smaller than that of Monsieur Papadakis, but more interesting is the ash nearby. Demetrius frowned. "Ash? From a torch?" Poirot plucked a pinch between two gloved fingers. "Not from wood, monsieur, from burned paper." Helena's eyes widened. "Lysander burned something here?" "Or someone else burned it after he departed," Poirot corrected softly. "Something he should not have possessed, something worth killing for." Callistratos stepped closer. "Fragments still remain?" Poirot nodded. "Only the smallest, but enough." With delicate precision, he lifted a few blackened curls from the dirt. When he pressed them lightly, they crumbled to dust. Yet a faint outline remained on one edge. A round seal barely visible. Demetrius paled instantly. "Is that—" "Yes," Poirot said gently. "The seal of the Hellenic Maritime Authority." Helena gasped. Then Lysander was burning official documents. The detective straightened. His expression was grave, almost mournful. "Documents," he said, "that revealed irregularities in the shipping registry of this island. Irregularities that would implicate several individuals in smuggling antiquities, an operation, I fear, that extends far beyond our peaceful island." Demetrius swallowed. "Smuggling? Here?" Poirot's gaze rested on him a moment longer than necessary. "But of course, your family shipping business, Monsieur Kargas, has long been rumoured to turn a blind eye to certain informal cargoes." Demetrius stiffened. "Rumoured by whom? Jealous rivals? Malicious fishermen? You cannot accuse my family without proof." Poirot offered a small bow of concession. "I accuse no one, monsieur, but I gather evidence, and evidence whispers truths even when men prefer lies." Helena stepped closer to the detective. "Monsieur Poirot, are you saying Lysander discovered the smuggling ring?" "Yes, mademoiselle, and more than that, he tried to expose it." The wind stirred the olive branches overhead, producing a rustling sound like low murmurs, nature itself responding to the revelation. Poirot continued walking, following a faint trail leading beyond the ruined shrine. After several minutes, he paused before a steep outcrop overlooking the sea. The waves crashed below, shards of moonlight breaking across their crests. "This," he said softly, "is where Lysander met his murderer." Helena wrapped her arms around herself. "But how can you be certain?" Poirot tapped the ground with his cane. "Here the soil is disturbed, not from the hooves of animals, not from erosion. It is the pattern of two men struggling, one fighting to escape, the other forcing him toward the edge." Callistratos knelt beside the disturbed patch. "I see it, the drag marks." Demetrius took several unsteady steps back. "This is madness. You are building stories from shadows." "No, monsieur," Poirot replied calmly. "I build conclusions from facts, and the facts point to someone who feared Lysander's discovery would expose them. Someone with access to the shipping manifests. Someone who met with him privately, without raising suspicion." Poirot turned slowly, his gaze sweeping each face. Helena Marcos, her fear genuine, yet shadowed by something unsaid. Demetrius Cargus, nervous, defensive, sweating under the moonlight. Inspector Callistratos, stoic but uneasy, forehead lined with tension. "Three possibilities," Poirot said softly. "Three motives, three lies hidden in the folds of truth." "And which of us," Callistratos asked quietly, "stood here with Lysander that night?" Poirot lifted a hand. "Patience, mon ami. The truth walks slowly, but it always arrives. Tonight, I only illuminate the path." He stepped closer to the outcrop, pointing to a thin crack in the rock. "There," he whispered. They leaned forward to see it, a tiny shard of metal lodged between the stones. Callistratos used his knife to pry it free. It glittered under the torchlight, a cufflink shaped like an anchor. Demetrius staggered back. No, that cannot be. My cufflinks are—" Poirot raised a hand to silence him. "Do not worry, Monsieur Cargas. You are not the only man on this island to wear nautical ornaments. But it looks exactly like—" "Oui," Poirot said quietly. "Exactly like the set worn by Captain Nicholas Vatis." Helena gasped. "But Captain Vatis is away on a route to Crete." Poirot's moustache twitched. "So he claims." The detective pocketed the cufflink carefully. "We will summon him at dawn," Poirot said, "for this small object speaks loudly. Yet, I caution you, tonight's revelation is but a step forward. The true architect of this conspiracy may not yet be visible." He turned to the group, eyes glinting with resolve. "Prepare yourselves. Tomorrow the web begins to unravel." Behind them, the olive trees rustled again, this time sounding less like whispers and more like warnings. Chapter 8. The captain's return and the storm of accusations. Dawn on the island broke with a copper-coloured sky, the kind that foretold tempests rather than calm seas. Fishermen paused at the harbour's edge, casting uneasy glances at the horizon. The storm clouds gathering in the south matched the mood simmering through Villa Asteri, where Hercule Poirot awaited the arrival of the man whose absence had grown too conspicuous. Captain Nicholas Vatis returned sooner than expected, summoned by urgent telegrams from Inspector Callistratos, and pulled ashore by the whispers swirling among the villagers. His ship, the Calliope, anchored heavily at the pier, and within minutes the captain strode toward the villa with long, deliberate steps. He cut an imposing figure. Tall, sun-hardened, his face a puzzle of stern lines carved by years at sea. His uniform was immaculate, though the shadows under his eyes revealed a restless night, or perhaps a guilty conscience. Poirot observed him from the villa terrace, fingertips pressed together. "Ah, our captain arrives with the rising sun." Callistratos exhaled slowly. "Let us hope he cooperates." "As do I, mon ami. But hope is a fragile oar with which to row." Helena Marcos and Demetrius Cargus stood at opposite ends of the terrace, tension stretching between them like a frayed rope. Both looked toward the approaching figure with different shades of dread. When Captain Vartis reached them, he removed his cap politely, though his gaze flickered warily from one face to another. "Monsieur Poirot," he said with the faintest bow, "I received your message. I do not understand why I'm needed. My duties—" Poirot lifted a hand. "Your duties, Captain, must surely include cooperation with the law, n'est-ce pas?" A faint muscle twitched in Vartis's jaw. "Of course." "Then you will forgive me," Poirot continued smoothly, "for asking why a man supposedly on a route to Crete left behind a most inconvenient souvenir." He opened his hand. The anchor-shaped cufflink glinted in the morning light. Vartis's expression froze. "I lost that weeks ago," he said, but the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. Poirot's brows arched. "Lost? How curious that it was found upon the cliffs where Monsieur Papadakis met his death." Helena clasped her hands together to steady them. Demetrius leaned forward, breath shallow. Callistratos took a step closer to the captain. Vartis's silence stretched thin, like a rope pulled taut against an unforgiving wind. "I did not kill Lysander," he said finally. "Then you admit you were there?" Callistratos pressed sharply. The captain hesitated. "Yes, I met him that night." A collective breath drew inward. Poirot nodded, as though the admission merely confirmed the path of logic already laid out in his mind. "Tell us everything, Captain." Vartis looked toward the sea, where his ship waited like a silent witness. "It was late," he began, "just past midnight. Lysander sent a message asking to meet by the old shrine. He claimed to have information that concerned me. I thought it was about a dispute we had the week before, nothing of importance, but when I arrived, he was frightened." "Frightened of what?" Helena asked softly. "Of someone listening, someone watching." Vartis shook his head. "He said he'd uncovered something dangerous, documents about the harbour registry. But before he could explain, we heard someone approaching. He panicked and told me to leave. I did. I swear to you, he was alive when I walked away." Demetrius exhaled sharply. "Convenient." Vartis turned on him, eyes blazing. "I had no reason to kill him." "And yet," Poirot interjected gently, "you also had no reason to lie about your voyage. The Calliope remained anchored overnight. You never sailed for Crete." Silence fell. Even the distant gulls seemed to pause. The captain's eyes burned with a mixture of defiance and guilt. "I had personal reasons for remaining. Reasons that have nothing to do with Lysander's death." "Personal reasons," Poirot repeated, "often become criminal reasons when examined closely." He stepped closer, cane ticking lightly against the marble floor. "Hercule Poirot does not judge on confession alone, but motives, they speak with passion. And yours, I fear, are entangled in the shadows of this island's secrets." Vartis clenched his fists. "You want the truth? Fine. I stayed because I suspected irregular shipments were being offloaded after dark. I wanted proof before informing the authorities." Callistratus's eyes widened. "You suspected a smuggling ring?" Vartis nodded. "Yes, and Lysander said he had evidence of it. That night he wanted to share it until someone else arrived, someone he feared more than any of us." Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "Your story, Captain, is plausible, but your cufflink remains the stain upon your honour." "I dropped it during my struggle to keep my footing," Vartis said. "The ground is uneven. Lysander grabbed my arm in panic. I nearly fell." Poirot studied him. His face, his voice, his trembling pulse. Then he turned to the others. There you have it, a meeting, a panic, and a departure. Yet Lysander died shortly after. Therefore, someone else must have been present. Helena's breath faltered. Someone followed them? Oui, mademoiselle, and that someone did not wish to be seen. Poirot's gaze swept across the group, lingering on each face with surgical precision. Demetrius Cargus looked outraged, yet afraid. Helena Markos appeared pale, lips trembling. Callistratos wore the expression of a man whose certainties were dissolving beneath him. Poirot continued. The smuggling ring gave motive. The documents gave opportunity. But the killer, he paused, the killer possessed more than fear. They possessed knowledge of every movement on this island that night. Vatis looked sharply at him. You believe the killer lives among us? Poirot nodded slowly, and soon, he said, their mask will crumble. Thunder rolled across the distant sky, deep, resonant, and ominously timed. A storm was coming, over the island, and into the hearts of the suspects, who now realized Poirot's web was tightening. Tomorrow, he would uncover who among them had murdered for silence. But today, the winds had begun to howl, and guilt trembled beneath the surface like a creature waiting to break free. Chapter 9. Revelations in the Tempest. The storm arrived by mid-afternoon, crashing over the Greek island with a ferocity that turned the sky the color of bruised marble. Lightning clawed across the clouds, and thunder rattled the shutters of Villa Asteri. Inside, Hercule Poirot stood before the great stone hearth, hands clasped behind his back, eyes reflecting the flicker of the fire. The suspects had been gathered at his request, each one simmering with unease, each one aware that the moment of reckoning was drawing near. Inspector Callistratos paced near the balcony doors, listening anxiously to the storm hammering outside. Demetrius Cargus stood stiffly at the far end of the room, jaw tensed, fingers gripping the back of a chair. Helena Markos sat on a small embroidered sofa, her face pale, her breaths uneven. Captain Nicholas Vatis remained near the doorway, arms crossed, watching Poirot intently, perhaps as one sailor watches another navigating dangerous waters. Poirot finally turned. "Mes amis," he began, "we are close, so very close, to unveiling the truth behind the tragic death of Monsieur Lysander Papadakis. But before the truth emerges, one must clear away the fog of deception that each of you has contributed to." Demetrius bristled. "I have hidden nothing." Poirot tilted his head. "Oh, but you have hidden much, and yet you are not alone." He stepped forward, cane tapping lightly on the marble floor. "This storm, you see, is appropriate, for murder is often accompanied not by calm, but by chaos. Emotional, moral, or physical, and in this case, all three." A clap of thunder punctuated his words. Poirot gestured toward the window. "This morning, after Captain Vatis returned, I conducted a brief but enlightening examination of the shipping registry. Recent entries, historical notations, and missing documents. What I discovered revealed more than discrepancies. It revealed betrayal. Over years, not days." Helena pressed a hand to her throat. "Betrayal by whom?" Poirot's gaze settled on her with quiet intensity. "By the victim himself." The room froze. Even the storm seemed to pause, as though listening. Helena whispered, "Lysander! But he warned us. He said he'd uncovered wrongdoing." "Oui," Poirot replied gently, "because he believed he had no choice. But before becoming the martyr, he was the manipulator. For years he participated in the smuggling ring. He handled the forged documents. He coordinated the quiet deliveries under the cover of night. He profited handsomely." Demetrius's mouth opened in shock. That cannot be." "It is the truth," Poirot said softly. "And then something changed. perhaps conscience, perhaps fear, perhaps the desire to protect someone. His eyes flickered toward Helena, or to save someone. Helena flinched, tears forming. I didn't know, I swear it. Of course not, mademoiselle. Your affection for him was genuine, but his affection for you, that is where the tragedy begins. He wished to escape the criminal enterprise, and someone would not allow it. Poirot now turned toward the hearth, warming his hands briefly as though the gesture helped gather his thoughts. When he spoke again, his voice rippled with quiet urgency. Last night, I returned to the cliff path. I studied the struggle marks once more, and I discovered something new, something that the moonlight had concealed. He removed a small object from his pocket, holding it up. A thin sliver of lacquered wood. A fragment of a boat oar, Poirot said, broken off during a struggle. A small dinghy was used that night, moored below the cliffside. Someone climbed up the rocks unseen. Callistratos straightened, face tightening. A dinghy! But only the Coast Guard and private owners have such vessels. Yes, Poirot said, and one such vessel belongs to the family estate of Monsieur Demetrius Cargas. Demetrius paled. You think I rode out there to kill him? That is absurd. Poirot raised a hand. Calm yourself, monsieur. I do not accuse blindly. He walked slowly toward Demetrius. Your boat was indeed taken out that night, but not by you. Demetrius blinked. Then who? Helena inhaled sharply. Poirot turned to her. Mademoiselle Marcos, you took the boat. Her lips parted in a small cry. No, Poirot, Enough, he said gently. I do not condemn. I only reveal. Helena's hands trembled violently. Yes, I took the boat, but not to harm Lysander. I wanted to meet him. He sent me a message. Her voice broke. He said he had something important to confess. Yes, Poirot nodded. And he meant to tell you everything. His crimes, his fear, his hope for redemption. Helena sobbed softly. Demetrius whispered, then she found the body. No, Poirot said, eyes glinting. When she arrived, Lysander was already gone. Murdered minutes before. Vartis asked quietly. Then who killed him? Poirot turned sharply. The one who had the most to lose if Lysander revealed the truth. The one who had access to the registry. The one who could erase entries or forge new ones. The one who sent Lysander to meet at the shrine under the guise of a confession, only to follow him and silence him forever. The room fell still. Poirot faced the man who had been pacing restlessly near the balcony. Callistratos, Poirot said softly. Inspector, it was you. A gust of lightning split the sky, illuminating Callistratos's face, frozen, stunned, then slowly hardening into something darker. Helena gasped. Demetrius staggered backward. Vartis squared his shoulders. Callistratos's voice was low. You have no proof. I have all the proof I need, Poirot said. You controlled the registry, the shipments, the customs inspections. Lysander threatened to expose you. You lured him to the shrine. The cufflink he ripped from Captain Vathis's sleeve during his panic created a convenient scapegoat. And when he tried to flee, your hand sent him over the cliff. The inspector reached for the door, desperation flickering in his eyes. But Poirot raised a hand. Do not run, mon ami. The storm is far too wild, and justice is already upon you. A final roar of thunder shook the villa, and the truth, undeniable, crushing, filled the room like the turning tide. The murderer had been revealed. The storm outside raged on, but in Poirot's eyes the tempest of deception had finally begun to settle. Chapter 10. Justice on the Cliffs. The storm had passed, leaving the island drenched and glimmering under a pale, silvered sun. The air was heavy with salt and rain-soaked earth. But within Villa Asteri, a different tension held sway. A quiet, expectant hush. Hercule Poirot stood on the terrace, observing the gathered company. Helena Marcos, her face still pale but resolute. Captain Nicholas Vatis, his arms folded, calm yet watchful. Demetrius Kargas, visibly shaken, and Inspector Callistratos, now restrained by local authorities, a mix of rage and humiliation in his eyes. Poirot's small, precise hands rested atop his cane. "Mes amis," he began, voice smooth, deliberate, "we have reached the final act in a drama that has unfolded with deceit, fear, and betrayal. The culprit has been identified, motives exposed, and the tragic fate of Monsieur Lysander Papadakis illuminated. Yet the story's conclusion must be as meticulous as its unravelling." He turned first to Helena. "Mademoiselle, your role has been that of the innocent seeker of truth. You acted from concern for Lysander, not malice. Your courage in taking the boat was remarkable. You sought knowledge, not vengeance." Helena lowered her gaze, her hands trembling. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I only wished to prevent tragedy." "And you, Captain Vatis," Poirot continued, his gaze sharp and appraising. "You returned at dawn, bearing information crucial to understanding the chain of events. Your cufflink, lost yet found, provided the pivotal clue that allowed us to trace the movements of our suspects that fatal night." The captain inclined his head solemnly. "I did what I could." Poirot's eyes then rested upon Demetrius Kargas. "Monsieur Kargas, though implicated by circumstance, you were not the murderer. You possess strength and courage, but not the moral compulsion to commit such a crime. Your boat was used without your knowledge, and your family business, though shadowed by illicit activity, is not stained with this particular act of violence." Demetrius exhaled shakily, relief and lingering fear flickering across his face. Finally, Poirot turned to the restrained figure of Inspector Callistratos. The man's expression, previously proud and commanding, now carried the weight of undeniable exposure. His eyes flickered, restless, searching for escape, though none existed. "Inspector," Poirot said, voice measured, "you were entrusted with the law. Yet when opportunity and fear of exposure presented themselves, you chose murder. Monsieur Papadakis threatened to reveal your manipulation of the shipping registry, your orchestration of illicit activities, and your calculated silence during the smuggling of antiquities. The evidence, both physical and circumstantial, left you no choice but to act, until your hand was revealed by the very same tempest you attempted to hide within." Callistratos' lips twitched in a mixture of defiance and defeat. "You think this is justice, Poirot? You think exposing me will absolve the rest?" Poirot's small moustache twitched, a delicate sign of his inner resolve. "Justice is not absolution, Inspector. Justice is truth. The law will take care of your punishment. I only ensure the truth is recognized, and the truth, like the sun after a storm, reveals all shadows." Poirot gestured toward the cliffside beyond the terrace. "Let us reconstruct the final moments. Lysander Papadakis, realizing the danger he faced, attempted to flee the shrine. He was confronted on the cliffs by you, Inspector. A struggle ensued. The young man, brave but unarmed, was cast into the sea below, his life extinguished in a single devastating act. Yet even in death, his courage endures as a catalyst for exposing wrongdoing." Helena gasped softly. "Andreas, the boy, he witnessed part of it?" "Oui, mademoiselle. Andreas Vasilis was restrained and hidden, but his account, combined with the physical evidence, footprints, disturbed soil, the fragment of the boat oar, completed the narrative. It was your presence, courage, and keen observation that allowed the web to be unravelled fully." The inspector's face hardened. but Poirot's penetrating gaze made resistance futile. Every attempt to manipulate events, to conceal, to mislead, is now laid bare. You are cornered not by conjecture, but by certainty. Outside, the sun broke fully through the dissipating clouds, casting golden light across the terrace. The storm's energy had drained, leaving the island bathed in clarity. Poirot's sharp eyes followed the waves lapping at the base of the cliffs, waves that had carried Lysander's final descent, and now mirrored the resolution of the case. "Mes amis," Poirot said, his tone softening, "the island has demanded its reckoning. Those who acted in greed, fear, and malice have been unmasked. Those who acted in courage, loyalty, and love have been vindicated. Yet one must always remember, the human heart is capable of shadows as well as light, and only through vigilance, reflection, and moral courage can we prevent the shadows from prevailing." Helena moved closer to the detective. "And what of the documents, the registry?" Poirot smiled faintly. "They have been returned to proper authorities. The smuggling ring, though powerful, is now exposed. Captain Vatis and others will see that the law is restored, as is proper." Vatis nodded. "It is a relief, Monsieur Poirot. And Lysander's death, at least now, it was not in vain." Poirot's moustache quivered with emotion barely restrained. "Correct, Captain. And it is my hope that the lessons of this island, the price of greed, the power of courage, the inevitability of truth, will not be forgotten." Demetrius, still trembling, spoke quietly. "And the storm? It almost feels like it cleansed more than just the island. It feels like it cleared the air of secrets." Poirot chuckled softly. "Ah, monsieur, storms are honest. They do not hide what is underneath. They reveal. And tonight, in this aftermath, the human conscience has been revealed as well. Let us hope it learns from what has transpired." As the group turned toward the villa, preparing to descend into the restored routine of life on Calistran, Poirot lingered a moment on the terrace. The wind stirred his coat. The scent of wet earth filled his senses, and he allowed himself a brief, private reflection. Justice had been served. Truth had emerged. And yet, in the quiet corners of the island, subtle mysteries still lingered. Small shadows that would require vigilance, discernment, and the wisdom of little grey cells in the days to come. Poirot straightened, cane in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. "The case of the Greek island conspiracy is concluded," he said softly, "but the mind, like the sea, is never still, and I remain ever watchful." The sun climbed higher, illuminating the cliffs and the sparkling waves below. Helena, Vatis, and Demetrius moved toward the villa, leaving Poirot alone for a moment. He inhaled deeply, savouring the clarity of the morning after darkness. The island, though scarred by murder and deception, now gleamed with the possibility of renewed life and order. And in that light, Hercule Poirot allowed himself the smallest, most discreet smile. For the truth, after all, had triumphed.